They dragged me into the mud, called me a traitor to womanhood, and told me I didn't deserve my own name anymore. It was January 1945, outside a half-frozen American POW processing camp near Metz, France, and the world I had known, uniforms, codes, duty, pride, had collapsed into a single cold slap across my face as I stumbled out of the transport truck. The war had already burned through my village, my family, and whatever sense of purpose I once clung to, but nothing prepared me for the moment my own comrades shoved me toward the Americans as if I were filth to be disposed of. Snow fell in clumps, mixing with the mud around my boots, and I could taste blood on my tongue from where the guard had struck me during surrender. They pushed a line of us, women from communications, medics, clerks, toward a makeshift yard surrounded by razor wire. A few cried. A few kept their chins high. I just felt hollow. One of my former unit women hissed as I passed her, "You cost us the retreat. You killed our men." Her accusation sliced deeper than any winter wind. I had been a radio operator stationed in the Ardennes, and when the final retreat order came through, the airwaves had collapsed into chaos. Signals jammed, commands overlapped, and a cracked transmitter misfired at the worst possible moment. The blame fell on me, even though the equipment had been failing for weeks. No one cared about the truth, not my officers, not the women who worked beside me, not even those whose lives I had tried to save by staying until the last possible second before surrendering. All they wanted was someone to despise, and I was convenient. I kept one hand inside my coat, fingers wrapped around the small coated notebook tied with a strip of cloth. It was the only thing of my earlier life I refused to surrender. Not because it was incriminating, though it easily could have been, but because it held the last remnants of my brother's resistance work. He had been captured by the Gestapo 2 years earlier for helping French partisans. If the Americans found the notebook, they might assume I had been a spy. If the remaining German officers found it, they might accuse me of treason. So I held it against my ribs, praying the swollen pages stayed hidden. The American MPs barked orders, their voices sharp but not cruel. We were lined up for processing, and the humiliation began instantly. Jackets off. Boots inspected. Hands on heads. I tried to focus on the snow gathering on the brim of my cap, the sharp sting of cold air in my lungs, anything except the hands shoving me forward. The MPs moved with practiced efficiency, but one of them, tall, broad-shouldered, with brown hair tucked beneath his helmet, did not leer or mock like some of the others. When one woman near me broke down crying, he stepped forward, guiding her gently instead of dragging her. I didn't know his name then. I only knew that when my turn came to step into the lice inspection tent and they ordered me to strip, he turned away, giving me privacy in a place where privacy no longer existed. That single gesture, so small it barely lasted a second, hit me harder than any slap. Inside the tent, frost clung to the canvas ceiling and the floor was wet with melting snow. A female American medic checked our hair, our clothes, our bodies for lice and infections. She didn't speak German, but she kept her voice steady and calm, unlike the German officers who used to bark at us as if we were dogs. When she touched the bruises on my ribs, she paused and whispered something to the male MP outside. His shadow stiffened. I didn't understand why that bothered him, but I would learn his reaction later. When I stepped back into the cold, my arms wrapped tight around my torso, the same tall MP was waiting near the exit. He wasn't looking at me directly, he seemed to be watching the perimeter, but I could tell he noticed the tremor in my hands. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence alone felt strangely grounding after the chaos of the past days. They assigned us barracks, wooden huts that smelled of damp straw, sweat, and hopelessness. Inside, the women murmured accusations under their breath. A group of them sat together on the lower bunks, glaring at me with narrowed eyes, whispering the same word again and again, Veradarin. Traitor. I climbed onto an empty top bunk at the far end, pulling my thin blanket around me and turning my face to the wall. I didn't try to sleep. The cold and the shame made it impossible. Hours later, after nightfall, gunfire crackled in the distance. German holdouts, someone said. The American guards rushed along the fences, shouting orders. Feet pounded the frozen ground. For a moment, fear surged through the barack. Some women hid beneath their blankets, others crouched near the door as if expecting execution. I sat motionless, listening to the chaos, waiting for fate to finally claim me. Then, through the cracks in the wooden slats, I saw him, the same American MP, moving between the floodlights with his rifle ready. But unlike the other guards shouting, he paused when a woman near the fence started screaming. She was one of the medics who had surrendered earlier that day, and panic had seized her completely. Instead of yelling back, he lowered his rifle, approached her slowly, and spoke softly until she could breathe again. I heard none of his words, but the tone alone was enough to calm even me. That was the moment I realized he was different. And that terrified me more than anything. Because I had learned long ago that kindness was the most dangerous weapon in wartime. Cruelty was predictable. But kindness? Kindness made you hope. Later that night, as the yard quieted and the moon rose over the razor wire, I heard footsteps outside our barack. He was making rounds again. For reasons I couldn't explain, I climbed down from my bunk and peeked through the frost-covered window. He stopped near the corner of the building, rested his gloved hands against the railing, and let out a long breath that clouded the air. He looked exhausted. Human. Nothing like the officers who had marched prisoners across Europe without blinking. When he turned slightly, moonlight caught the side of his face. Strong jaw, tired eyes, a faint scar near his temple. A mixture of hardness and gentleness. I stepped back from the window before he noticed me, heart pounding for reasons that made no sense. Hours passed. I lay awake, staring at the wooden beams above me. My body ached, my bruises throbbed, but none of that mattered compared to the dread settling into my bones. At dawn, before anyone else awoke, a German woman shook my shoulder sharply and hissed, "Get up. They're calling you. The Americans want you for questioning." My blood froze. I had heard rumors of what happened in those interrogations. And as I stepped into the cold morning, the guard waiting by the door, the same man from the yard, looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. But there was fear in his eyes. Not for himself. For me. The rain did not fall in drops that morning. It fell in sheets, cold enough to sting the skin like needles as we stood in formation with our hands behind our heads. January 1945 had no mercy for anyone, least of all prisoners lined up for roll call in a muddy American-run camp near Metz. My shoes were soaked, my toes numb, and my breath hung as a pale cloud in the frigid air. An American lieutenant paced in front of us, reading names from a clipboard with the impatience of a man who would rather be anywhere else. But when he reached mine, he stopped, lowered the paper, and looked at me as if he had found a rat in his kitchen. "Lissel Falk," he said, his accent flattening the syllables. "Accused of sabotage during Wehrmacht retreat." Dozens of eyes turned toward me. Some were curious, others judgmental, but a few, my fellow German women, were poisoned with hatred. One muttered under her breath, loud enough for others to hear, "Traitor." She cost our men their lives. The lieutenant lifted his chin in satisfaction, as if their contempt confirmed something he already believed. "Keep a close watch on her," he ordered the MPs, "she's trouble." The tall American guard, the one who had looked away during the lice inspection, the one whose presence unsettled me in ways I didn't understand, stood behind the lieutenant. His jaw tensed at the accusation. He didn't say anything, but his eyes flicked toward me for a brief, unreadable moment. After roll call, we were herded toward the interrogation hut. My heart hammered as I walked, boots sinking into mud, the cold creeping up my legs. I had hidden my coated notebook beneath the straw of my bunk before dawn, its absence now pressed against my ribs like a missing limb. If they found it, my life would unravel before anyone heard the truth. Inside the hut, a single bulb flickered overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow. An American intelligence officer sat behind a desk, tapping a pencil against a stack of papers. He didn't bother with a greeting. Instead, he dropped something onto the table with a sharp slap. My notebook. My stomach plunged to my knees. "Found this under her bedding," a guard announced. "Good catch," the officer replied, flipping through the pages. "These symbols military?" "Aye." I don't know what you mean, I whispered. A lie, of course. A weak one. But revealing the truth, that the notebook contained encryption founded by my brother's resistance cell, would condemn me faster than a confession. The officer leaned forward. You expect us to believe you didn't write this? These codes came from somewhere. You want to explain? The door creaked open. Cold air swept in, and with it came the tall MP, Corporal Hayes, I later learned. He approached the table, eyes scanning the notebook with a familiarity that made my heart stop. Sir, he said slowly, that's not Wehrmacht military code. At least not standard issue. The intelligence officer narrowed his eyes. You sure? Daniel nodded once. Positive. Some of these patterns look more civilian or resistance-based. My pulse thundered in my ears. He recognized the structure. He could read fragments. How? Why? The intelligence officer looked irritated, as if this complication annoyed him. Fine. We'll hold her until we know more. He tossed the notebook aside and signaled for the guards to take me away. As they dragged me toward the door, Daniel stepped aside, but his gaze followed me, steady, troubled, almost protective. Outside, the rain had turned to sleet. As I walked back to the barracks under guard, the mud sucked at my boots, pulling me down with every step. The women inside the barracks knew something was wrong the moment I returned. One of them, a medic with sharp, tired eyes, pushed past me and spat at my feet. You're not just a traitor, she hissed. You're a curse. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I climbed onto my top bunk again, curling into myself as the cold seeped into my bones. But humiliation was not the worst part of that day, not even close. In the afternoon, a fight broke out behind the barracks. Two women accused a teenage POW of stealing extra bread. The girl cried and insisted she hadn't, but in a world where bread meant survival, words meant nothing. Someone slapped her. Someone else shoved her to the ground. Instinct, not reason, drove me forward. I stepped between them, shielding the girl with my body, shouting for them to stop. Their fury turned toward me instantly. A fist struck my cheek. Someone grabbed my hair and yanked hard enough to rip strands loose. Before the crowd escalated into something far worse, American MPs arrived, breaking us apart. The lieutenant recognized me immediately. Of course it's her, he muttered. Tie her to the fence. Let her cool off. They dragged me across the yard, my knees scraping the gravel, and chained me by the wrists to a post near the outer fence. The metal cuffs bit into my skin. The cold rain soaked through my clothing until I couldn't tell where the water ended and my tears began. Prisoners passed by, some sneering, some avoiding my gaze entirely. As the sky dimmed and evening settled over the camp, my shivering became uncontrollable. My thoughts blurred. My fingers went numb. Somewhere nearby, guards shifted during their patrols. Boots crunched through gravel. A lantern flickered. Then I heard someone stop beside me. I didn't look up, not until something heavy and warm fell across my shoulders. A coat. Thick. Dry. Smelling faintly of gun oil and cedar. My eyes shot upward. Daniel Hayes stood beside me, his rifle slung, his face shadowed beneath his helmet. He didn't say anything. He didn't make a show of it. He simply draped his own coat around me and stepped back, hands loose at his sides, as if daring anyone to comment. For the first time since my surrender, I felt warmth. Not just physical, something deeper. Dangerous. Human. The sleet continued to fall, but the trembling in my body eased. Daniel stood watch for hours, silent except for the occasional quiet command to approaching guards, "I've got this area covered. Move on." No one questioned him. When the night deepened and the camp lights buzzed overhead, I found the courage to speak. "Danke," I whispered, voice barely audible. He didn't look at me, but his jaw softened. "You're welcome," he said quietly, in German. Perfect German. My breath caught. He continued his patrol as if nothing had happened, but everything had changed. Later, just before dawn, the lieutenant stormed over and unlocked the chains. "Back to the barracks," he barked. My legs nearly collapsed beneath me. As I stumbled forward, Daniel stepped subtly into my path, steadying me with one gloved hand. His touch was firm but gentle, and for the briefest moment our eyes met. Something passed between us: recognition, understanding, danger. Then the lieutenant shouted, "Move, Falk," and the moment shattered. I returned to the barracks, clutching the coat around me. The other women stared but said nothing. For once, their silence felt like mercy. I lay awake until morning, replaying every second at the fence, every word Daniel had spoken, every gesture he had made. I didn't know why he cared. I didn't know what it meant. But I knew something was coming, something that would change everything. Before the sun rose, boots pounded outside. Guards shouted orders. My name echoed through the cold. When I stepped out of the barracks, Daniel stood there, helmet under his arm, expression grim. "Listen," he said softly, "they want you again. And this time, it's different." And I understood, in that moment of icy dawn, that whatever waited for me would decide whether I lived, died, or disappeared entirely. The camp woke that morning with a tension so sharp it seemed to slice through the air like a knife. Even before any guard shouted an order, even before the siren groaned over the yard, every prisoner felt it, an unease settling over Metz like a storm that hadn't yet broken. By February 1945, Germany was collapsing, the front line buckling, and rogue units were rumored to be roaming the forests behind American positions, desperate and vengeful. That fear seeped into the camp like cold through the wooden walls. And when Daniel Hayes led me to the small storage building near the motor pool, I knew the danger surrounding us was far greater than my personal shame or the accusations that clung to me like a second skin. He closed the door behind us, shutting out the wind. The interior was dim, lit only by slats of pale light leaking between the boards. Crates marked with U.S. Army stencils were stacked along the walls, smelling of oil, fuel, and damp wood. Daniel paced once, twice, then stopped in front of me, his eyes shadowed with something I hadn't seen before: fear. He set a stack of papers on a crate and motioned for me to look. The top sheet contained fragments of coded transmissions, letters, numbers, symbols scrawled hurriedly by hand. "These were intercepted last night," he said quietly. "Intelligence thinks they're nothing. But I don't." I felt the air leave my lungs. The patterns, the rhythm of the spacing, the punctuation, even the breaks, were painfully familiar. My throat tightened. "This looks like I didn't finish. I couldn't." "Daniel did it for me. It looks like your notebook." He wasn't accusing me. He wasn't even suspicious. He was asking for truth with a softness that terrified me more than threats ever could. I swallowed hard, stepping closer to the crate, fingertips hovering over the intercepted lines. The longer I looked, the more my mind shifted into the state it once lived in, analyzing, calculating, hunting for repetition, sync patterns, and shorthands. These weren't Wehrmacht orders. They weren't SS codes. They weren't Luftwaffe signals. No. They were something far worse. Resistance codes, corrupted, altered, rewritten with the jagged edges of desperation. My brother's encryption style, twisted into something deadly. I looked up sharply. Where did these come from? "A patrol heard radio chatter from the forest behind the camp," Daniel said. "The signals repeat every few hours. Last night, command said it was probably rogue retreating units trying to confuse us." He shook his head. "But I don't buy that. Not with this pattern." He wasn't wrong. I traced one symbol, a staggered triangle, then another, a looping double circle. My chest tightened. "This isn't random," I whispered. "This is directional. It's pointing to coordinates and a time." Daniel grabbed a pencil and handed it to me. "Show me." I hesitated only a moment, because fear of the truth was second only to fear of what would happen if I stayed silent. As I knelt beside the crate, he crouched beside me, close enough that I could feel his breath stir the loose strands of hair at my temple. The pencil trembled in my grip at first, but muscle memory took over. I circled 2 sequences, drew an arrow, then wrote numbers beside them. Daniel watched intently. Those are coordinates? Yes. A junction. A rail line. My hand stopped trembling. My mind sharpened. This isn't about confusing the Americans. It's not even about escape. They're planning something big. Daniel leaned closer. How big? A chill went through me, not from the cold, but from the realization growing like ice inside my chest. A Red Cross transport passes that junction tomorrow morning. Wounded prisoners. Civilians. I scanned the rest of the page, dread crawling up my spine. They're going to hit the train. My brother's network would never, but someone must have broken off and restructured the code for violence. Daniel cursed softly. If command misreads this, they'll think German POWs in camp are coordinating it. And punish us accordingly, I said, bitterness threading through my voice. This isn't just sabotage. It's a death sentence for everyone involved. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the cramped space. If I take this to command as is, they'll interrogate you again. Harder this time. He turned toward me, jaw clenched. You might not come back. I knelt there, staring at the symbols I had decoded, the shapes that carried my brother's memory and someone else's malice. If I stayed silent, the train would be destroyed and scores of people would die. If I spoke, they might execute me on suspicion alone. My throat tightened. You can't tell them it came from me. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. If I lie about where this came from, I lose my rank. My whole career. Maybe worse. And if you tell the truth, I lose my life, I whispered. Silence stretched between us, cold and fragile. Something inside that silence shifted, not anger, not panic, but a clarity neither of us wanted to face. Daniel knelt next to me again. Listen, he murmured, if you help me decode the rest of this, we might be able to warn the engineers before dawn. But if we do this, you have to trust me. Trust. The most dangerous request in war. But as he held my gaze, I felt something tighten inside me, not fear, but the terrible weight of needing someone. He wasn't just asking for information. He was offering something unspoken, something I had not felt in years, a lifeline. I found my voice. Give me charcoal. He blinked. What? Charcoal, I repeated. And a flat plank. If I'm going to rebuild the full message, I need room. He hurried to the corner, ripped the lid off a crate, and pulled out a plank used for stabilizing supply boxes. Then he grabbed a charred stick from the ashes of a broken lantern. I spread the plank on the dirt floor, pushed the papers aside, and began reconstructing the message stroke by stroke. Numbers flowed from memory. Patterns cross-locked. My fingers blackened with soot as I worked faster, the symbols connecting like veins of lightning across the board. Daniel watched in stunned silence as the full message took shape. A time. A location. A warning to the saboteurs. A final phrase that made my stomach twist, no survivors. Daniel exhaled shakily. If that train goes through the junction, it won't make it. And if the Americans think this plot came from inside the camp, I didn't finish. The outcome was unthinkable. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then Daniel straightened, decision hardening in his eyes. We're leaving. Tonight. We're going to that junction ourselves. The word struck like a blow. What? No. That's madness. It's the only way, he insisted. Command won't believe us. They'll think you forged it. They'll think I'm compromised. But if we're caught, if we don't go, the train dies. His voice cracked, barely audible. Listen, please. I froze. No guard begged a prisoner for anything. Yet here he was. The room felt suddenly small, too warm, too charged with everything we weren't allowed to feel. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. I won't let them hurt you. Not for this. Not for something you didn't do. I felt myself breathe for the first time in hours, drawing in air so sharp it almost hurt. Before I could respond, a distant boom shook the storage walls. The ground vibrated. Shouts erupted outside, American guards calling for all units to prepare for immediate inspection. Daniel grabbed my wrist. They know something is happening. We have to run before they lock the camp down. I stared at him, heart racing. If we leave now, there is no going back. He held my gaze, steady and unflinching. Then we don't go back. Another explosion sounded in the distance, closer this time. Daniel tightened his grip and pulled me toward the door. And as we rushed into the cold, I realized the truth. Whether I trusted him or not no longer mattered. The world was already coming for us. And we would either face it together or die separately before dawn. The storm rolled in before sunset, a low growl of thunder echoing across the hills behind the camp as Daniel guided me through the shadows toward the outer fence. The guards were distracted by the distant explosions rumbling through the forest, rogue German units testing their weapons, maybe, or sabotaging supply lines. No one suspected that a German POW woman and an American corporal were slipping toward the motor pool like ghosts. Daniel kept one hand on his rifle and the other hovering near my back, not touching me but close enough that I felt the heat of him through the cold. I didn't speak. Neither did he. The silence between us wasn't empty, it pulsed with urgency, fear, and something more dangerous than both, trust. We reached a jeep camouflaged under a tarp. Daniel knelt and pulled back the cover, revealing a fuel can, a map, and a small medical kit. He checked the engine, then turned to me. Get in the back, he whispered. Stay under the tarp until we're out of the perimeter. I climbed in, pulling the heavy canvas over me. The space smelled of rubber, oil, and cold metal. My heart thudded against the wooden plank Daniel had given me earlier, still etched with charcoal markings of the decoded message. I clutched it like a lifeline. If we failed tonight, all of this, my brother's code, Daniel's risk, the lives on that Red Cross train, would disappear into the void. The jeep lurched forward. Through small gaps in the tarp, I saw flickering beams from the watchtower sweep across the yard. Daniel drove with controlled steadiness, nodding to a passing guard as if he had every right to be there. When the beam came dangerously close, I held my breath, my nails digging into my palms. But no shout came. No alarm. Only the crunch of gravel under tires as we rolled past the final checkpoint and out into the open fields beyond the camp. Once we were far enough from the fences, Daniel tapped the tarp twice. I crawled out, letting the freezing air slap my face. The sky was bruised with storm clouds, and wind tugged at Daniel's uniform as he navigated the muddy road. The junction is 15 kilometers out, he said, raising his voice over the engine. We'll have to go the last part on foot. If the saboteurs are already setting charges, they'll hear us coming. I nodded, pulling his coat tighter around my shoulders. He noticed, glancing sideways. I should have brought another, he murmured. You're freezing. I met his eyes. I've survived worse. He didn't smile, but something softened in his expression, a flicker of guilt or admiration or both. The storm hit halfway there. Rain hammered the windshield in relentless sheets. Lightning forked across the sky, briefly illuminating Daniel's tense profile, jaw clenched, eyes narrowed against the storm, one hand gripping the wheel with white-knuckled determination. When thunder cracked overhead, he instinctively reached across and steadied my arm before returning his hand to the wheel. I felt that touch long after it was gone. We left the road and followed a narrow dirt path through the woods. Trees swayed violently in the wind, skeletal branches clawing at the air. Daniel killed the engine and parked the jeep behind an outcropping of rock. We walk from here, he said, grabbing his rifle and a lantern covered by a shield to hide its light. I followed him into the trees, the mud sucking at our boots. He walked ahead but turned often to check on me, guiding me around roots and fallen branches, shielding me from the worst gusts of wind. I shouldn't have needed protection. I had seen war. I had survived worse humiliations than mud and rain. But having someone care if I tripped or froze or broke, it was dangerous how much that mattered. As we neared the junction, Daniel motioned for silence. We crouched behind a cluster of rocks overlooking the railway line. The iron tracks gleamed wet in the storm. At first, the scene looked deserted. But then a flash of lightning lit up the world, and revealed 3 figures kneeling near the wooden trestle bridge, working on something metallic and sinister. Explosives. Dozens of them. My breath caught. They were almost done. Daniel's face hardened. "We have to get closer," he whispered. "If we don't disable the detonators," he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. We crawled down the slope, keeping low. Mud smeared my palms. Rain soaked through my hair and clothes. But adrenaline pushed us forward. As we approached the bridge, Daniel pointed to a cluster of wires connected to a crude ignition box. "You know more about this than I do," he said quietly. "Can you disable it?" "Yes," I whispered, though my voice trembled. "If I can reach the primary charge." He nodded once, then moved away to flank the saboteurs. The storm masked the sound of our steps, but my heart pounded so loudly I feared they'd hear it. I slid beneath the rail, crawling along the wooden beams until I reached the nest of wires. My fingers were numb from cold, but I forced them to move. I cut the first wire with the small knife Daniel had handed me. Then the second. Then footsteps. Voices. Getting closer. I froze. A beam of lantern light swept across the tracks above me. The saboteurs were returning to check their work. If they found me under the bridge, they would shoot without hesitation. I crawled out, slipping on wet gravel, and stood up in plain sight. 3 rifles snapped toward me instantly. Their faces were gaunt, soaked, desperate, men who had lost everything and chosen violence as their last identity. The leader stepped forward. "Who are you?" he barked in German. "What are you doing here?" I lifted my hands, though they shook. "You don't need to do this," I said. "There are civilians on that train. Wounded soldiers. Children. This isn't glory, this is murder." The leader sneered. "And what would a traitor like you know of glory?" Before I could respond, a gunshot tore through the night. I flinched, because the man in front of me hadn't fired. He had been hit. Not by me. By Daniel. "Lissel, get down," he shouted. I didn't react fast enough. Another saboteur swung his rifle toward me, fury twisting his features. The shot came before he pulled the trigger. But it wasn't his bullet. It wasn't mine. It was Daniel's. And he put himself between us. A deafening crack split the air. Daniel slammed into me, shoving me to the ground just as the third saboteur fired. The bullet meant for my chest hit Daniel instead, close range, brutal, shattering through his shoulder and throwing him sideways into the mud. "Daniel!" I screamed. He collapsed, clutching his bleeding arm, teeth clenched against the pain. I crawled to him, gripping his shirt with desperate fingers. Rain washed blood across his sleeve. His breathing hitched. "Finish the charges," he gasped. I forced myself to move. Dropping to my knees, I ripped open the remaining wires, ignoring the sharp edges cutting into my skin. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold the knife. Thunder boomed overhead. A train whistle echoed faintly in the distance, closer than we had time for. "Come on," I whispered. "Come on, come on." A final spark flickered. I yanked the last wire free. The detonator box died in silence. Moments later, Allied engineers, alerted by Daniel's earlier coded signal, stormed the area, overpowering the surviving saboteurs. The Red Cross train rolled through minutes later, lights glowing like salvation in the storm. Bodies were collected. Weapons confiscated. The threat ended. But Daniel lay in the mud, pale, bleeding, and shaking. I dropped beside him, lifting his head into my lap. Stay with me, I whispered, brushing rain from his face. His eyes fluttered open. He managed a weak smile, the kind that broke hearts. Told you. I wouldn't let them hurt you. His blood soaked through my hands, warm and terrifying. When the engineers reached us, they aimed their rifles at me, shouting questions I didn't hear. All I could see was Daniel, all I could feel was his weight, all I could understand was the horror of how close he had come to dying for me. And as they dragged me away from him, demanding explanations, one question echoed through the storm. Why would an American soldier take a bullet for a German POW woman? I didn't know the answer. But I felt it. Deep. Terrifying. Irrevocable. The field hospital was a maze of canvas, mud, and wounded men breathing through pain thick enough to taste in the air. Lanterns swung overhead, casting yellow halos across the stretchers, the cots, the blood-stained blankets. They brought Daniel an hours after the gunshot, unconscious, skin pale beneath the grime and rain. I saw only a glimpse of him before the guards dragged me away, the limp arm, the soaked bandage, the way his head lolled to the side as corpsmen rushed him toward surgery. That image rooted itself inside me like a blade I couldn't pull free. They locked me in a temporary holding tent nearby, my wrists bound, my wet clothes clinging to me like a second skin. Outside, the storm finally passed, leaving only the sound of dripping rain and crackling radios. I sat on the cold ground, shivering not from the chill but from a deeper terror, fear that Daniel wouldn't wake up, fear that everything he had risked would vanish with his last breath, fear that the train had passed safely but the cost had been too high. Hours later, footsteps approached. The flap opened, revealing not a medic or guard, but a U.S. intelligence colonel. Tall, broad-shouldered, his cap stiffly angled, his eyes sharp with suspicion and calculation. He dismissed the guards and stepped inside alone. Lissel Falk. His voice rolled through the tent like a verdict. You've caused quite the commotion. I didn't answer. My throat was too tight to form words. He circled me slowly, the way a man inspects an unfamiliar weapon, checking for weaknesses, for cracks, for usefulness. A German POW woman and an American corporal, out past perimeter, interfering with an active sabotage threat, he said. Your little adventure could cause an international incident. My eyes lifted. We saved that train. Yes, he replied, but that does not absolve you. He crouched in front of me, hands clasped behind his back. Corporal Hayes claims responsibility for bringing you out of the camp. Says you convinced him the threat was real. My heart dropped. Convincing him was not the truth. We had discovered the threat together. But Daniel had rewritten the story to protect me. Again. The colonel leaned closer. Why would an American soldier take a bullet for you? I couldn't answer. I didn't know how. I didn't even understand it myself. The colonel sighed, stood, pulled a folder from under his arm, and opened it. Inside were more intercepted messages, fragments of the same corrupted code. You understand these, he said. We know you do. I stared at the symbols. The familiar loops and lines. My brother's dying legacy twisted into violence. These transmissions are still active, he continued. Rogue units are planning more attacks. Bridges, rail lines, maybe even camps. He closed the folder with a sharp snap. We need someone who can decode them. Someone fast. It took me a moment to understand. You want me to help you? Not want, he corrected. Require. He pulled a document from his coat and held it toward me. This is a cooperation contract. If you sign, we give you immunity for your previous accusations, new civilian papers, relocation assistance after the war. You'll never see a POW camp again. My breath hitched. Freedom. A future. A life not dictated by uniforms or barbed wire. But his eyes hardened. There's one condition. Always conditions. Always chains hidden beneath offers. If you sign, you sever all contact with Corporal Hayes. My heart stopped. What? He is already under scrutiny for protecting you once, the colonel said. Now he's taken a bullet for you. Command is furious. We can make the situation disappear, for both of you. But only if you walk away from him permanently. The tent spun. My pulse roared in my ears. He continued, voice steady. If you stay near him, he risks court-martial. Dishonorable discharge. Prison. Maybe worse. I gripped the edge of my cot, knuckles whitening. And if I don't sign? Then you go back to camp. With the sabotage evidence found in your possession. And Corporal Hayes will be questioned about aiding the enemy. Pain lanced through me. They weren't giving me a choice. They were choosing for me. Think carefully, he said. You may believe you care about him. But caring for him means leaving him. When the colonel left, I sat frozen, the document on my lap. Rain tapped against the canvas. Somewhere beyond the tent walls, stretchers rolled, medics shouted, trucks rumbled through mud. The world moved. But I remained still. Hours passed before a young nurse entered, her face soft with exhaustion. She unlocked my bonds and said quietly, he's awake, the soldier who saved you. My heart lurched so sharply it hurt. Can I see him? She hesitated. Only for a moment. He keeps asking if you're alive. She led me to a separate tent, past rows of wounded men. The air was thick with antiseptic and the coppery scent of blood. At the far end, behind a thin curtain, Daniel lay propped on a cot, his shoulder heavily bandaged, his skin pale but his eyes open. The moment he saw me, relief flooded his expression. Lissel, he breathed. He tried to sit up, but pain seized him. I rushed to his side, placing a gentle hand on his chest. Don't move, I whispered. His eyes searched mine, filled with urgency. They're blaming you, he said. I told them it was my decision. All of it. I shook my head. Daniel, you shouldn't have done that. He let out a shaky laugh. What was I supposed to do? Let them think you were, his voice faltered. Emotion thickened the air. The nurse stepped back, giving us space we shouldn't have had. Space that felt stolen, intimate, dangerous. His hand moved slowly across the blanket until his fingers brushed mine. Warm. Trembling. Real. My breath caught. For a moment, everything outside the tent, war, commands, consequences, seemed to fade. I thought you might die, I whispered. His thumb brushed lightly against my knuckles. I'd do it again, he murmured. I don't regret anything. My chest tightened painfully. His eyes softened, something unspoken shimmering between us. Not romance, not yet. Something quieter. Deeper. Born of fear and sacrifice and the impossible bond forged between enemies who shouldn't look at each other like this. Then, suddenly, the air raid siren wailed through the camp. A shrill, rising scream. The nurse flinched and rushed outside. The lights flickered. Voices erupted. Panic stirred the tents into frantic motion. Daniel reached for me with his good arm. Hide, he gasped. You're not supposed to be here. I ducked beneath his cot just as soldiers stormed past, boots pounding like drums overhead. Dust rained down from the canvas. Daniel's hand slipped beneath the cot, finding mine in the darkness. His fingers curled around mine tightly. The sirens, the shouting, the pounding footsteps, they all blurred into a single heartbeat. When the alarm finally ceased, I crawled out from beneath the cot. Daniel's breathing was shallow, but his grip remained steady. You need to go, he whispered. They'll be back soon. I shook my head. Daniel, the colonel gave me a choice. He frowned. What choice? My throat tightened. They want me to decode the transmissions. In exchange, they'll free me. His eyes flickered with hope, and then fear. But they said I must cut ties with you forever. Silence. Heavy. Crushing. Daniel looked away, jaw tight. Listen, if leaving keeps you safe, then go. I shook my head fiercely. They'll punish you. They're already watching you. He gave a humorless laugh. I'm a soldier. Punishment comes with the uniform. I leaned closer, unable to stop myself. I don't want to leave you. His gaze lifted to mine, raw emotion shining in it. You might have to, he said softly. War doesn't care what we want. The curtain rattled. Footsteps approached. Daniel squeezed my hand one last time. Whatever happens, he murmured, I'm glad I met you. Then I was pulled away by a guard, the decision twisting inside me like barbed wire. At dawn, I signed the papers. But not the ones they expected. Spring 1946 smelled of ash and new beginnings, an impossible combination that clung to the ruins of what had once been Germany. Buildings stood like broken teeth against the sky, whole neighborhoods flattened into gray wastelands where children played among bricks that still held the heat of old fires. I walked through it all with a leather satchel on my shoulder and new identity papers tucked beneath my coat. Lissel Falk, the name on the documents read. Not traitor. Not POW. Not enemy. Just a civilian woman in a shattered country trying to stitch together a life from torn scraps. But no matter how many roads I walked, no matter how many ruins I sifted through, one absence followed me everywhere, Daniel Hayes. After I signed the colonel's contract, I had been moved from one secure Allied office to another, decoding message after message until the transmissions finally stopped. Each coded fragment I unraveled felt like unraveling part of my past. My brother's handwriting turned into violence, my own skill turned into a weapon for people who barely trusted me. When the work was done, they gave me new clothes, ration cards, and a ticket back across the border. They told me my contribution had saved lives. They told me I should be proud. But pride was a luxury I couldn't afford, not when the cost of my cooperation had been walking away from the only person who had seen me as more than a prisoner or a liability. I tried writing. At first 1 letter, then 10, then dozens, sent to every U.S. military hospital, every depot, every recovery unit I could find listed in the occupation zone. Weeks passed. Then months. My letters went unanswered. Eventually, I received one back with 3 words stamped across it, recipient reassigned overseas. I read those words until my tears blurred them into ink stains. I knew what reassignment meant. The Pacific. The final stage of a war that refused to end even as Europe struggled to breathe again. Still, I kept searching. By June, Germany was green with spring. Grass pushed between rubble stones. Markets reopened in patches of cleared streets. Soldiers hurried through checkpoints, trying to maintain order among people who had forgotten what order looked like. Every few days, I returned to a small Allied communication center posted within an old schoolhouse. The building smelled of chalk and diesel. Inside, clerks in uniforms sat at desks, flipping through files, sending cables, organizing transport records. One morning, as I stood in line to inquire about yet another missing person report, an American sergeant approached me. "Are you Fräulein Falk?" My heart leapt. Yes. He handed me a small brown parcel wrapped with twine. No return address. No note. Only a single word inked on the front, Lissel. My fingers trembled violently as I unwrapped it, afraid of what I might find, and more afraid of what I wouldn't. Inside, cushioned by a folded piece of cloth, lay a metal dog tag. Cleaned. Polished. Daniel's name stamped across it in clear, sharp letters. My breath caught, my knees nearly gave way. The sergeant cleared his throat. "A soldier brought that by," he said. "Said he promised to deliver it if you ever came looking for Corporal Hayes." "Where is he?" I whispered. The sergeant's eyes were gentle but evasive. "Ma'am, I'm not at liberty to discuss all details. But I can tell you he survived the gunshot at the junction." Relief crashed through me so powerfully I swayed. However, the sergeant continued slowly. He suffered shell shock after deployment in the Pacific. He was sent home early. Ohio, I believe. A new ache bloomed in my chest, hope sharpened by fear. Shell shock. A wound no bandage could close. Do you know his address? I asked. The sergeant hesitated, then lowered his voice. There's a town listed in his transport records. Small place. Quiet. He scribbled a name on a scrap of paper and slid it into my hand. If you go, be prepared for anything. 2 weeks later, after navigating checkpoints, ration stations, and a long transport through American-controlled ports, I found myself stepping off a bus into the summer heat of rural Ohio. Fields stretched in every direction, bright green beneath the sun. Wooden houses dotted the landscape, smoke curling gently from chimneys. Children ran barefoot in dusty roads, chasing dogs and shouting in accents I barely understood. It didn't feel like a country at war. It felt like someplace untouched by the brutality that had shaped every corner of my life. I walked to the small white building that served as the town office. Inside, a woman behind a desk looked up at me with polite curiosity. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for someone," I said. "A soldier named Daniel Hayes." Her smile faded. "Ah, Hayes." She opened a drawer and removed a ledger bound in brown leather. She flipped through pages filled with names, dates, and addresses. Then she stopped. Her eyes softened. When she spoke again, her voice dropped to a whisper. "I'm afraid you've come too late." The room tilted. My stomach turned into stone. "What do you mean?" She closed the ledger gently, as if afraid of hurting it. "He passed earlier this year. Complications from his injuries." My chest tightened until I couldn't breathe. The world shrank to the thickness of a single heartbeat. "He's buried at the cemetery just outside town," she added softly. "A simple stone. He didn't have much family." I thanked her, but the words felt hollow, drifting through air thick enough to drown in. The cemetery lay atop a low hill overlooking the fields. Rows of white stones stood in neat lines, gleaming under the afternoon sun. I walked slowly between them, clutching his dog tag so tightly the metal edges dug into my palm. When I found his name, Daniel Matthew Hayes, etched into a small marker with a freshly planted wildflower beside it, my legs finally gave way. I sank to the grass, tears soaking the earth beneath me. For a long time, I said nothing. I simply sat with him. With the silence. With the ache of all the words we never had time to speak. Finally, I reached into my satchel and removed the small coated notebook I had carried all through the war. The same one that had condemned me, saved me, haunted me. The same one Daniel had protected without ever asking what it meant. I placed it gently at the base of his stone. "You saved my life," I whispered. "More than once. And I never got to save yours." Wind rustled the leaves overhead, a soft sigh moving through the branches like a reply. Footsteps crunched behind me. I turned. A young woman in a nurse's uniform, American, early 20s, hair pinned neatly, stood holding an envelope. Its edges were worn, as if it had been handled many times. "Are you Lissel Falk?" she asked softly. I nodded. She stepped forward, offering the letter with both hands. "He wrote this before his last deployment. He asked me to deliver it if you ever came." My fingers shook as I took it. The envelope felt weightless and unbearably heavy all at once. The nurse gave me a small, sad smile and stepped away, leaving me alone in the golden light of late afternoon. I knelt beside Daniel's grave, broke the seal, and unfolded the letter with aching care. His handwriting, strong but slightly uneven, covered the page. I read each line slowly, tears blurring the ink. He wrote about the night under the bridge. About the coat he put around my shoulders. About the way I said his name in the storm. He wrote that he had nothing to give me except gratitude, and the truth that he had never felt more alive than in those hours standing between me and death. And in the final line, creased from where the paper had been folded many times, he wrote, "I didn't write back because I had nothing to offer you but a wounded man's love, and you deserved a life untouched by war. The letter slipped from my fingers and drifted onto the grass. I pressed my forehead to the cool stone. War took you from me, I whispered. But love kept you close. The wind stirred again, warm and gentle. And for the first time since the war ended, I let myself cry, not from fear, or shame, or survival, but from the simple, devastating truth that some men save your life once, and others save it every day they're gone.